for most Kenyans, if they begin to listen and have an understanding of what made the second generation leadership, what made the second generation leadership was to now revert to a relationship with God that involves God talking to them, and then they're fashioning their lives around what God tells them. If you notice, Moses had a rod. If he lifted that rod up before the Red Sea, it was split in two. The rod was what he would strike on a rock, and the rock would bring water. But when God was preparing him to go to the promised land, he gave him the opportunity once more. And this time, instead of hitting or striking the rock, he was told, speak to the rock. He failed to speak to the rock because he was upset with the people, maybe he wasn't processing right, or whatever reason. Instead, he went back to what he knew as the first generation leadership style and struck the rock once. God wouldn't let water come for the first strike, so he struck again. God let the water come. At that point, Moses disqualified himself from the second generation, from the leadership in the promised land, because he didn't want to use a rod there. He wanted to use speech. So if you're a Kenyan and you want to prepare yourself, you must stop using props, meaning things already set up before you that say to you, this is the way to do things. Whether it's coming directly out of our culture or coming out of influences from outside us, because we can tell that a lot of the patterns we use today come from someone saying this is the best way, someone saying this is how it was done, someone saying this or that, and we just go to school to literally copy those things and come and apply. He's saying that's not what's going to work now. If you want to be part of the second generation leadership and produce according to the counsel of God, there's no getting away from one thing. You must begin to hear God. If you are Kenyan and you want to be part of it, there's no other way except you hear God. In fact, Jesus said something in an interaction he had when he was being tested by Satan. He says, man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Technically what he meant. Remember when God would say to, Adam and Eve, that you can eat of the tree, every tree except the tree that is in the middle of the garden, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? He says you can eat. Now, the trees didn't sustain them because they were trees. The trees sustained them because God said trees would sustain them. But the mistake we make is that if God says the trees will sustain us, we go to the tree, eat of it, it sustains us, but we don't know that the tree doesn't have the power on its own to sustain you. It's the word behind it that makes it sustain you. And God is trying to tell men, it doesn't matter how I have dealt with you in your immaturity. You have to come to a new maturity in me. So Jesus said, I live by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God, rather than the bread he assigned to play a role in my life. So this is what Kenyans must learn. You are either led by the Spirit of God, or you stay in the old patterns that have not worked. Now, the reason we call it the Commonwealth of Nations, let me start from that, is the Commonwealth of Nations, the whole idea in man's thinking is that we would work together to make the world a better place. That's the whole idea. That's also what's behind the United Nations after the Second World War, and that's always been the reason behind alliances throughout time. All the alliances in time were designed to make life better, at least for those who are in alliance against other people, to have a better state of affairs for people. Now, the whole problem with the alliances and the way we function, even if you take the United Nations as an example, is if you look carefully, one of the challenges on the earth that was revealed from Genesis chapter 4, which is Cain and Abel, is that the resources from what man can see and how his history has emancipated are finite. So it doesn't go round. It meant that therefore the guy who can become stronger than the others gets more of it. Or the man who is able to oppress the other gets more of it. The man who is better able to take advantage of others gets more of it. So now, first of all, see that the system by which things are gotten is already faulty. If you look at the United Nations, it's each man's opinion for everybody that suits them. That's everybody's opinion. This is the best way to do the world, right? Because this suits me. The other person on the other side, this is the best way to do the world because this suits me. Now, when you think about that, then we see that there's a problem with the Commonwealth of Nations, and it's just a problem of leadership. So now, if we're ever going to get things changed, then we need a leader in the Commonwealth of Nations. And that leader must understand the model for which the world itself was even created. Now, some will say God didn't create it, some will say it came from this source or that source, but everybody's worldview is up to them. But if you understood how the world was created and how humanity functions, you can actually establish a leadership that helps everybody see a number of things. First of all, the resources are not finite. They are finite with the level of understanding and wisdom and knowledge you have. But they are not finite in actual sense. Let me give an example from scripture. There was a widow woman that was commanded to sustain a man called Elijah. She was a widow, husband dead, had nothing, just had a little oil and a little flour. There are many examples in scripture. So in her mind, her resources were finite. And she was planning to just eat with her son and die. The man of God says, no, it's not finite. It's in your mind. It's your experience. It's your limitation that makes you function that way. Just give me first and watch and see. And instantly her resources were infinite. So don't allow yourself to think that what is on the earth is all there is. No, there's more. There are interactions that will produce results. Like chemistry can have two different components bring together to produce a third. There are so many things that can happen like that. So what we need is a leader who begins to live it out, not talk. We don't need talkers. We need people who live out, who by the practice of what they have heard will begin to produce results. So when Israel came in, the first mandate was to start doing that. So when they showed that in the process they had, God always had something he gave them that put them on top. The whole idea was, tell everybody, see, God is real. He's there. Find access the way we have, and you'll find results the way we have. That's what God's intention is, that this nation will become a leader in the Commonwealth of Nations by the reason of the things that are made manifest in their people.